But let's look at Romans 2 as you know that as I'm preaching through Romans, and we just got done when I preached through Romans 1. It's a very difficult passage, and it talks about those dirty, rotten sinners, and then it switches to 2, and it talks about the dirty, rotten saints. And so I'm going to talk to you this morning, and here it starts. It says, "You therefore," and that's you dirty, rotten saints. It says, you have no excuse. You who pass judgment on someone else, for whatever point you judge the other, you're condemning yourself, because you who pass judgment do the same things. Now we know that God's judgment against those who do such things is based on truth. So when you, a mere man, pass judgment on them, and yet you do the same things, do you think you will escape God's judgment? Or do you show contempt for the riches of his kindness, his tolerance, his patience, not realizing that it's God's kindness that leads you towards repentance? But because of your stubbornness, church, dirty, rotten sinners, and your unrepentant heart, you who are storing up wrath against yourself for the day of God's judgment. And when his righteous judgment comes, you will be revealed. I changed words over there a little bit. A friend of mine was a pastor, and he went to take this little church out in Idaho. And after the first Sunday, there was a little note. And this guy, he could sing like you wouldn't believe. He played guitar, and we were in a band together, and he was just, he had all the looks. He looks like Robert Redford. All the girls always idolized him, and he just had always something going, a very gifted guy. And so he goes to this church with this family in a little country church in Idaho, and he gets this note the next day, and I called him and said, "Hey, how you doing, brother?" And he goes, "Well, I'm not doing too good. I got this note, and it says, I don't like your singing, I don't like your guitar, I don't like you, and I don't like any," it just went, I don't like. And usually it's unsigned also, and that was his first Sunday in the church. How we judge others. There's a comic strip picture of a pastor shaking hands with people as they were leaving church, and one woman remarked to him, "It was too long, too loud, and it clashed with all my sensibilities, and that was just your tie." Wow. We go and we like to look at Romans 1, and we see all the big sinners, the homosexuals, and all the stuff that's happening with that. And, we look at all the big sinners and all the stuff that's going on, and we point fingers, but 3 of them are pointing back at us. Because, the reality of it is that you and I were sinners too. And we're so easily judging others because they don't fit into maybe our box. Maybe they don't fit what we think it should be. And maybe we don't sing, all the hymns that you think we should sing. And we have children up here dancing on, up here. What kind of church is this, We're so easily judging because we don't like how something is done. Our human nature loves to play the part of an empire that calls balls and strikes on other people, but we don't like them called on us. There's a difference I believe, between finding fault and having a finding fault spirit and a loving discipline of really loving someone and trying to restore them back. Galatians 6:1 talks about we're to restore the believer who was caught in sin. And so there is something about coming alongside someone and pointing out something to the place of being able to restore them. Brothers, if someone is caught in sin, you who are spiritual should restore him gently. But watch yourself, or you also may be tempted. But so many times we want to point the finger at somebody. I was talking to an older lady in our church, and they were talking about getting together with some other ladies. And she said, the whole conversation was this lady was just criticizing and complaining about other Christians in the church. And I just scratched my head saying, Lord, how could this be? Even in the midst of so much good stuff is happening, and then this person all they could do is sit down and have a coffee and complain. You know, come on, church. What's wrong with us? You know, how come we can't get together and sit down and talk about all the miracles that God is doing? We heard testimony after testimony of testimony of what God is doing. But our human nature is to sit down and let's complain. Let's grumble. Let's criticize. Let's talk about one another and gossip. You know, we'll call somebody something, you know, and we'll say, well, that person shouldn't smoke. But then we'll gossip up a storm. What's worse? I'd rather have a smoking, drinking, struggling person than have an arrogant gossiper that just wants to gossip and tear people apart. Because we're the church, and the reality of the church is that it's a hospital, and it's full of sick people. And we're all sick in one way, and we're there to help each other back to health. So you therefore have no excuse who pass judgment on someone else. So quit passing judgment on other people. You know what happens in the church is that we get going so much is that we tend to get so going on all the things that we're doing inside the church that we never look outside the church or look outside our situation. And all of a sudden, everything that we have going on is just all churchy kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, we turn off things. I remember back some years ago that I was talking to a Christian couple, and they say, yeah, well, our insurance man is a Christian, our gas station guy is a Christian, our grocery store we go to is Christian, and you know, everybody that they're involved with is Christian. I said, well, is there any non-Christians in your life? Well, no, I don't want to get, you know, they didn't say this, but I don't want to get dirty. Let's get a little bit dirty, folks. Let's get in and crawl in the mud a little bit and see who we can pull out of that mud pit for the glory of God. In Matthew 7, it says this, if you turn to Matthew 7:1, it says, do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? Let me just say this. Some of you have logs in your eye, and you're worrying about the splinter in someone else's eye. Now, come on. You know, what? Get that log out of your eye, folks. How can you say to your brother, let me take a speck out of your eye, when at the same time there's a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the plank out of your own eye, then you'll see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. When we realize that before God and in the presence of God, that we're such dirty, rotten, unclean people. Isaiah had a vision, didn't he, in Isaiah, when he had a vision of the Lord. And all of a sudden he said, I'm a man of unclean lips. And there's a vision of a burning coal of God coming and purifying him. I had one experience with God that in a prayer time that I go back to. There's a time, and I've shared this before, that I saw that we were talking about the marriage and that we were the bride of Christ. And I had a vision of Christ coming down that altar, and I was the bride. And I couldn't even look up at him. I felt so ashamed, so unclean, so dirty. And I don't know how long we had this circle, and the chair in the middle was, and I was just down on my face. And at some point, after all the slobber and snot was gone, I reached out and I was able to touch the chair, and it was like I was touching the hem of his garment. And just an incredible cleansing that took place in my life. You know, and there's got to come some time in your life. And I was a pastor at that time. You know, that you experience God in such a way that first what it shows is it shows your dirty, rotten sin. It really shows who your character is and who you are. and the purifying work at God and the cleansing that takes place when you're able to see that and then get a really reality of our relationship with God, and that He took on the cross and went on that cross to take my sin, to take my shame, to take my guilt. If you saw my life before you, you'd say, man, I don't want to go to that church. That pastor, whoa, does he have a background? I got a background. I got baggage. Do you have baggage? But my baggage was put on that cross, and it was buried with Him, and I rise to newness of life. What about you, church? Have you risen to newness of life? Because I see a log in my eye, I can look to others and have compassion. I can look to others who are struggling, and instead of judgment, I can come alongside them and say, you know, I've been here before with you, but I'll be here again. Even though you stumble and fall, I'm not going to give up on you. There's times, you know, my flesh gets tired of it. There's times that, you know, I want to just kick them in the butt and, you know, get your life together. There's times I just want to say, get over yourself, and sometimes I do say that. But I'm there with them. I want to be with them to trump through the hardships of life. But so many times we as church, we don't want to put up with that. And I want to challenge you as Christians that instead of judging your brother, you can start walking alongside them. In Luke 6, I read it a little bit earlier in our offering time. But before he gets to talking about giving, he says in Luke 6, verse 37, he says, do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. I can't tell you how many times I run into Christians and say, well, I can't forgive that person. You just don't know what they did to me. Who cares? What did Christ do for you on the cross? And it's not for you to forgive, it's for God through you to forgive that person, because the forgiveness that God gives to us, and when we've received it in the fullness, we can't help but to be able to forgive that other person because it's flowing through us. And if we've died to Christ, it's no longer I who live, but Christ is living through me. And if Christ is living through me, I can forgive you. Because it's Christ in me. It's not me, because I've been crucified. I've been buried with Christ. It's no longer I who live. And I've seen someone who's been abused and used and everything else, and reach out that hand and say, I can love you because Christ loved me. And the thing that takes place in there is incredible, because God now can work through that person who's not expecting that at all. Who can you reach out to? Who in your list of people are as kind of ugly, unloving, unforgettable, unforgivable, that maybe God wants you to reach out and touch? Because not only can a freedom come to them, but as we heard your testimony, a freedom came to you and a healing came through you. Maybe some things of the Lord is holding back and you're not able to get because you're holding an unrepentant heart or an unforgiving heart. So maybe you, therefore, church, have no excuse, because there's judgment upon your life because you're not able to forgive. You're not able to love. You're holding things against people because of what they've done for you. And your whole concept is wrong. Is wrong. Because as a Christian, we're to walk in a way that the world cannot understand. And if you hold grudges, if you hold contempt in people because of the way you've been treated, you're missing the whole point. And all of a sudden, you've taken yourself off that cross. Now, it's now how I live is what is important. And you wake up in the morning and you say, how great I am. How lovely is the feet that I walk on to the whole world. And isn't the whole world glad that I'm here for them? You, therefore, have no excuse. You who pass judgment on someone else, from whatever point you judge others, you are condemning yourself. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. And then it goes in verse 38, give, and it will be given unto you. Man, when you give, and we talk about finances here, but it could be when you give forgiveness, it's a gift. When you give, it's a gift. When you give love, it's a gift. When you give patience, it's a gift. When you give time, it's a gift. Whatever you give, it's a gift that God recognizes, and it says that it will be given back to you in the same measure in which you give out, God will give to you. That's a kingdom promise. And now it doesn't say that, but maybe in the measure that you hold back, God will hold back on you. Now, I'm just saying. Then he said, this parable, can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they not both fall into a pit? A student is not above his teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like his teacher. And then it goes back into the spec again, the plank guy, the law guy. Verse 43 in Luke 6 says this, no good tree bears bad fruit. No good tree bears bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. Each tree is recognized by its own fruit. People do not pick figs from a thorn bush or grapes from briars. The good man brings good things out of the good that is stored up in his heart. And the evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For out of the overflow of his heart, his mouth speaks. You see, when Paul wrote in Romans in the 2nd chapter, that whole part that he just came out of these big sins of what these people are, and the Jews at that time would be saying, right on, Paul, those dirty, rotten sinners, and then he turns on them, because what he was trying to turn to is not just what you do, but it's the heart in which you do it at. It's what's in your heart. In fact, when Jesus came, he raised the bar of, he says, it said, what commandments are we to follow? And you have the 10 commandments. But Jesus raised the bar on that. He changed it. He said that not only if you commit adultery, but if you look at a woman with lust on your heart, then you've committed adultery. If you hate somebody, then you've committed murder. Because all of a sudden, it's not just what you do, but it's the motive of your heart. That's why when Jesus said to the Pharisees, he said, you're whitewashed tombs, because on the outside, you're whitewashed. You're doing everything that looks good on the outside, but on the inside, you stink of death. How about you, church? How about you, Christian? When you walk out of here, what is your life like? My desire is that you'd walk in the fullness of the blessings that God have for you. Because a good man, a good woman brings good things because it's stored up in their heart. What comes out of your heart? What flows out of your life? Is it salty and sick and the water's just putrid? Or out of your heart does it come of living water? Looking in situations that you would be Jesus to the dying world, that you're blessing people. You're living in a way that your life is a life of giving out forgiveness and love. For the outflow or the overflow of your heart, I believe, speaks louder than what your mouth does. Who have you been judging? Would you ask God right now to forgive you? Who have you been judging in your life? Who have you labeled in your life? Because really that's hypocrisy. And would you just commit it right now to the Lord? Would you ask God to change your heart of your attitude? Because maybe out of your heart, for whatever reason, has become, what's been flowing out of it has not been fruitful. And I believe God is asking you this morning that your life would produce good fruit. that the sin of condemning others, you'd ask God to forgive you. And you started looking at a life that you'd be a life of someone who's trying to restore life, to speak life, to speak in promises that the Lord has, to be able to look into situations and instead of bringing death, you're bringing life to that situation. It's a change of mind that we need to have, church. Because when we start walking off that, then all of a sudden we will become the living gospel that Jesus wants us to be.